think outside the box, if you will. I mean, go there, go off campus. Let's think this through. And sure enough, that's where the Mustang was born. When it finally hit, it took the country by storm.
Hi everybody, and welcome to another edition of Cars in Context. I'm your host, John Clor. You know, this is the Motor City, and this is the show where we put cars into the context of your everyday life. We've got a very interesting show for you today, as we usually do, but this one I think you're really going to enjoy because we're going to take an inside look at a headline that's been making the rounds lately. It's really kind of an important headline because it talks about your safety, yet it also talks about what's going on in the auto industry. And when I say that, I mean about a recall that's been forced upon Jeep and Fiat Chrysler on Jeep gas tanks. And I know you've read about this in the news. It's really important we get behind the scenes. We're going to talk about that and the poster child, if you will, of all the gas tank issues, the Ford Pinto. With me today, I've got a very special guest. It's none other than Jim Sawyer, a longtime auto journalist and analyst who now works with the Society of Manufacturing Engineers. Jim, welcome to Cars in Context.
Thank you, John. I'm glad to be here.
Jim, we've enjoyed having you on the show. Your brother is knocking it out of the park as well, Chris Sawyer of thevirtualdriver.com. Today, I brought you in because we both have experience with our topic, and it's going to be a very interesting discussion because I don't think people are really going to expect what we have to say. We'll have to find out.
We don't even know what we're going to say.
That's right. Okay, but before we do that, we have to find out first what's in the news. And Jim, I'll take this first one. You folks that measure your fuel economy by those little gauges that are on your dashboard, I got some really bad news for you. Those gauges, they're not all that accurate. In fact, according to the EPA now, the dashboard MPG gauges don't actually measure fuel consumption for your miles traveled. Rather, they use an algorithm that monitors things like RPM, gear selection, your throttle position, and most of the gauges they found, Jim, in cars today overstate your fuel economy by about 5%, but some of them can be off as much as 19%. So everybody seems to think those little gauges on the dashboard is actually their fuel economy. That's what they're getting. It says 26, so I'm getting 26. It's not true. Now, Jim, what's the best way really is it really the old way that you and I used to do it, do the math?
Yes,
miles
it is,
and gallons?
but people of our generation are probably the only ones left who know how to do the math. You know, when people stop at a gas station, do they write down their mileage?
No.
Do they record the amount of gas they put in? Probably not.
No. So
I do that math as I'm driving away from the station, figuring I'm $50 poorer. But
that's the math.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's the math that people are really paying attention
So
to.
don't use those gauges, folks. If you really,
They're a good comparative.
It gives you a ballpark figure
From this tank of gas to the other, but they're not accurate.
Yeah. Jim, do you have a headline for us?
Yes, I do.
All right.
Now this is shocking news. Zipcar, the well-known, I hear you saying what? The well-known Zipcar is now available in the Motor City. Detroit is the 25th major metropolitan area to be picked by Zipcar, and there are about 40 that have been assigned across the city, including public and private parking lots and garages downtown, plus Midtown, the News Center, Woodbridge, Rivertown, Hamtramck. Zipcars are also available across campus at Wayne State University and the College for Creative Studies, so they can creatively study these cars parked there rather than running them. Some Detroit businesses expect to save on transportation costs with a special Zipcar plan tailored to serve busy city traffic corridors.
Well, Jim, you know, if you're not familiar with it, folks, the Zipcar idea is, you know, they'll put a small, fuel-efficient car, park it someplace, and people can, it's not your car, it's not the company's car, the company just parks them around so you can have use of them, right?
Right.
So let's say you work downtown at Campus Martius and you got to go over to the News Center area. You don't have to get your car to the parking garage. They're just parked down there, and then you use the Zipcar. They give you the keys.
Right. You have to be a member, I think, and there's a card reader.
So they probably monitor your mileage, and then they charge the company.
Or it might be time. I'm not really sure.
Well, how is that? I mean, does people really want to drive some car that's been used by 15 other people before you?
Well, this is something that really would be great in dense urban areas like New York, parts of Chicago, San Francisco. Detroit, I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
But it might serve the part of the Detroit population that knows how to drive but doesn't have a car but needs one on occasion. And I'd have to look at the numbers, but it might be cheaper than calling a taxi.
You know, some of the people I've known that are around Wayne State seem to like the Zipcar idea, but we'll have to see what happens. Let's see it. Let's see if the business thrives. That's the only way to look at it.
Right.
Speaking of business, I've got a headline here about global auto standards. And why is this important, folks? Well, you know that we build cars to certain standards here in the United States, but in Europe, they have their own standards. And of course, they have their own standards in Japan. Everybody seems to have their own standard. And it's really a costly, time-consuming thing to get your car to fit everybody else's different standard. So the good news is there's been ongoing negotiations with this new free trade agreement that we're having with Europe. And the word is, at least Ward's Auto is reporting this, that discussions are now taking place that would allow the United States and Europe to recognize the same set of standards for the first time in forever, right? Now, in other words, cars tested in the United States could also be sold in Europe without having to be changed or pass any test, or vice versa. Now, Japan and South America already have standards that are very similar to Europe's, but not ours. So if we could do this, it could eventually lead to one global standard for all automakers, and then it's been pushed for 40 years. But you know, the bottom line, everybody would save a lot of time and money if we could just agree on what the global standard is.
This will be an efficiency, if it comes to pass, in developing and selling cars.
Of course, you know, the savings are going to be passed along to us, right?
To the bottom line, to the shareholder.
To the bottom line, yeah. Okay. All right, Jim, give us another one.
Okay, Jeep is in the news. Jeep is in this program a lot today, and we'll get to it again later. But Jeep is turning out to be a very hot brand in China. In fact, this year has seen more Jeeps being imported into China than any other brand.
Wow. I thought
even surpassing the longtime import leader, BMW.
Yeah, well, they love their German luxury cars. So Jeep's passed the luxury German brand BMW. Wow.
Everything has its cycle. There are fads that come and go. Jeep at one time, 30 years ago, was the first and most popular foreign brand to be imported into China, and then was overtaken by Volkswagen and the German imports. The increase in imports in China came despite a hefty tax on all imported vehicles that the Chinese government has just levied. And there's an additional tax levied on those made in
the United States?
In the United States.
Well, isn't that nice? Not only do the Chinese lend us all their money, we have to pay them interest, but they put an extra tax on cars that they import from our country to their country. That makes it so pleasant. So all you Chinese buyers out there, I hope you're enjoying your Jeeps built in the United States. Speaking of that, does your car, right now, folks, think about this. Do you give your car a name? Do you name your car? I mean, that used to be a pretty big thing when we were kids. You know, all my aunts and uncles had the name for, you know, you're going to get a ride in Betsy. Betsy?
Very common.
Is that the Chrysler?
Car,
yeah, it was. But apparently, they've done another study. And we're not talking about the name that the manufacturer stuck on the side of your car. We're talking about you personally giving your car a little nickname. Now, today, nearly 25% of owners still give their car a nickname. Now, we've read a lot of studies that say, well, young people look at cars as an appliance, and they don't, you know, they don't have that personal connection with their car. But apparently, women are more likely than men, especially women between the ages of 18 and 34. They like to give their car a name, and which is, by the way, the largest demographic group in the study. So don't feel strange if you've nicknamed your vehicle, because it's really not that unusual, although I must admit, you know, I think I stopped doing it.
Me too.
Yeah.
I'd like to see what some of these names are, what the most popular names are for cars. As we said, Betsy was very, very popular.
Yeah. They didn't have in the study what the most popular name is, but, you know, young ladies who like to, you know, there's an old adage that you always have a nickname for your girlfriend, you know, Pumpkin, Honey Pie, so maybe they like having the, who knows. But anyway.
As long as it's not Hello Kitty, I'll be happy.
That's right. All right, so that's it for the news on this show. Right now, though, we're going to go into one of the bigger headlines that's been hitting the news airwaves lately, and it's about the Jeep recall and the gas tank fires that the NHTSA, the government, accused them of having a problem with, and how they responded is really important. We'll get into that whole burning issue about gas tanks right after this. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Cars in Context. I'm your host, John Clor. Today, we've got Jim Sawyer from the Society of Manufacturing Engineers with us today, and we're talking about a really big headline that's been kind of on everyone's mind, like this whole idea about gas tanks, car fires. It's a huge issue. I know you've seen the headlines recently that said that the Jeep models, especially the Cherokee and the Liberty, were involved in a recall effort by the federal government because they said because of the design of the gas tank being placed behind the axle, that these cars are unsafe inherently and they need to be recalled and fixed. Of course, Jim, the whole idea was, hey, wait a second, just because the gas tank is in the back, does that make these cars unsafe? And of course, it was one of the first car companies that said, no, we're not going to recall them. What are we supposed to do? I mean, you can't really redesign the cars. So let's get right to the top. Is a gas tank right behind the back bumper, is this a horrific design that was somehow put in these new Jeeps because someone wasn't paying attention, or what's the real story about that design?
Inherently, it is not a bad design. It depends on, it can be if you fail in other areas with your design, but all these cars are tested. They have to meet federal safety standards. They have to meet federal safety standards where if you do get hit in the rear, there's an automatic fuel shutoff, so that fuel does not keep flowing to the engine where a spark could originate and set the thing on fire. But we have to go back a little bit and look inside the human psyche and say, fire is a very frightening thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's face it. I mean, the idea that your car will get hit and then immediately burst into flame, first of all, you're carrying a flammable liquid in your car.
Right.
So, but how common is it? Just because the gas tank is placed between the rear axle and the bumper, Jim, this has been going, I mean, it's just a matter of packaging. It's where you can't have it under the back floor because that's where your feet are. You certainly wouldn't want it in the passenger compartment where the back seat is because you're sitting in there. I mean, you can go all the way back to the Model T, folks. I mean, and where gas tanks were actually put over the engine and there were gravity feed where they were up in front of the dashboard.
No fuel pumps.
No, it was just actually, in fact, when cars were going up a hill, they weren't getting enough gas. Some people have to back up the hill to get, and the idea was, that's why we called it a firewall. You wanted something to protect you if
between the engine and the passenger compartment.
Yeah, so they moved the gas tank away from the engine compartment and put it as far back as possible. Jim, this goes back to the earliest cars of all time.
Yes, and the most modern.
Yeah.
Tesla just had a fire where a piece of metal on the road was kicked up, punctured one of the batteries, created a fire. Now, you might say that given the paltry number of Tesla Model S's that have been sold, more of those have caught on fire in the hands of consumers than these Jeeps. I don't know. I don't have the figures in front of me, but the percentages are probably going to be pretty darn close. Fire in a car is not a common occurrence.
Right. So apparently the government said, well, there were 50 some odd fires in these cars and some fatalities, and the Jeep was supposed to then take the car back. And now, Jim, if you had a Jeep, how could you change it? I mean, the answer was, how are we going to fix it? And of course, as we all know now, folks, when the Chrysler said, no, we're not going to do it, how can they go back and take 2.7 million Jeeps and redesign a 10 or 12-year-old car? They're not going to do it. The fix was, according to the government, why don't you put some structure between the bumper and the gas tank? So the fix was, Jim, there's a trailer hitch option. There's a metal trailer hitch. Right. And they said, why don't you just install the trailer hitch, and that'll be between the bumper and the gas tank, and there's your fix.
Added strength.
And so Chrysler then said, we can live with that because they won't have to redesign anything. The trailer hitch is already out there. Just get the supplier to make some more. We had a photo of the trailer hitch that you saw there. That hitch, Jim, is subsequently, since it's been installed, people have recrashed the car. Here's the problem. The fix is more dangerous because of the additional structure. That could actually impact the gas tank and cause a fire where
there's more metal to be distorted, break, and puncture the fuel tank.
It's unbelievable.
Here's one of the things in this issue, and that is Chrysler's vehicles passed all applicable federal safety standards. They passed all applicable standards in all the markets around the world where these cars were sold. Right. The reason they gave in was they realized that the bad publicity was worse than the financial cost of attempting a
that
fix.
brings us to the Pinto. So let's let's talk about bad publicity. The Ford Pinto, everyone knows, when it came out was the part of the three stars of America, Pintos and Gremlins and Vegas.
Right.
Those three cars, when they hit the market in the early 70s.
Send the imports back from our shores.
Correct. So those three, it was our chance to fight against this rush of Japanese cars. The Volkswagen Beetle was out, and we had these three vehicles. All these three vehicles had gas tanks that were put behind between the axle and the bumper. Now, the Pinto,
many of those imports did too.
Yeah, pretty much.
A lot of cars.
Pretty much every design. That
right.
was the common way to design the car. It was they had a crash standard. The cars were crashed. The gas tanks weren't impacted. No problem. We got it solved. Pinto was a very popular car. It was low priced. It had great little engines that Ford had in Europe, and it outsold its competitors, both the Chevrolet Vega and the AMC Gremlin. I had guys in high school, we all had the mini cars. One had a Vega, had a Pinto, the other guy had a Gremlin. I teased my buddy with the Gremlin that said, you know, the car was just horribly disfigured in a meat slicing accident. The Vega, we know, had some issues with this all-new engine that really wasn't...
Right. Which they eventually replaced and put an iron block in.
Yeah, but the Pinto is the one that took the brunt of it. And why, Jim? Because after about a million of these cars were sold after the first few years, there were some highly publicized cases where the Ford Pinto was involved in a high-speed rear-end collision where there was some fatalities. And there was a do-gooder website, Mother Jones News, who jumped on it and said, grabbed some data they found that said hundreds of people were killed in Pinto fires, which was not true. This was not verified by any data. And they went on and did this big expose. That was back in the days where the big 2020s and the 60 Minutes.
Right.
And they said the Pintos are unsafe. It's sort of like the Corvair witch hunt, which they're unsafe at any speed with Mr. Ralph Nader. Pintos became the cry of these safety advocates who claimed the car was inherently unsafe because the car was designed with a gas tank behind. But Jim, the story that wasn't told was the fatality of these young girls that were killed in a highway crash. That wasn't told was that the nature of that crash had a lot more to do with the laws of physics than it did with any design of any of the vehicles involved.
And in the interest of full disclosure here, let me say that I once owned a 1974 Pinto.
Right
I brought my model of it
Jim,
here.
Jim, you shrunk your car.
I did. I shrunk my car a lot. I grew. Yeah, I'm pretty gruesome.
This is a beautiful 1974 Pinto. Yeah.
In the, I believe it was the late 70s in Indiana, 3 young ladies were driving in a Pinto on a rural road, and a customized, and that's an important part of the story, a customized
non-factory
van.
Back then,
which were very popular at the time.
The big vans.
Was coming, speeding up behind them over the speed limit. It was in excess of 70 miles an hour. Part of the customization was the replacement of the factory front bumper with a plank, a board. Very common at the time. People would put a nice piece of varnished woodwork on there.
Railroad ties,
really
2x10s.
Yeah, right. Yeah. The driver of the van saw the Pinto at the last instant, but not in time, hit the brakes, front of the van dives down, below the bumper of the Pinto, dropping the bumper of the van, and there's so much weight, so much force, and such a big battering ram on the front of this van.
At a high rate of speed.
At a high rate of speed, that it hit the Pinto, burst the gas tank, and I believe that it so deformed the body of this Pinto that the doors wouldn't open, the girls were trapped inside, and fatalities ensued. So, was the problem the design of the Pinto or the responsibility of the van driver and what was done to that van?
Yeah, I think, folks, that is the biggest issue. That when it comes to the Pinto, Jim, let's be honest with you. What's happened in our society, cars were all pretty much the same for years and years and years. Bumper heights were all the same. And then trucks and vans got involved. We had mini cars and trucks and vans on the same highway. Bumper heights became different. We've seen it now with guys with the big SUVs with the big wheels on it. You can be driving along and you see these lights in your mirror, and what is that? And it's this truck, this monster truck behind you.
Right.
If that ran into any car at a high rate of speed, you know, with 5,000 to 6,000 pounds of steel, it's physics. It's a matter of physics. So the Pinto was hit at such a rate of speed that it did cause this fire. And of course, the do-gooders, they're the ones that went out and said, you know, this was a horrific
evil rich corporations.
So the problem with this whole story, folks, is all fatalities are horrific, but for people to infer that the negligence idea came when Ford was accused of having an actuarial table that said the cost of recalling 3 million Pintos, or at the time 1.7 million cars, was about $12 or $15 a piece. The cost of settling the lawsuits would have been cheaper. But what people don't realize, insurance companies do that all the time. Actuarial, that's all done. It's not that Ford didn't want to fix the car, that they didn't want the Pinto to be repaired. They did issue a recall. They put a little plastic shield on the back of the tank.
Which proved effective.
And a longer filler neck. The fix was made. But by then, Jim, the damage to the car's reputation was destroyed forever by these. And now other people have done this. 60 Minutes had the GM side saddle gas tanks with their trucks. And those by side saddle, that means the tanks were outside of the frames. Somebody was hit broadside, the tank burst, there was a fire. So they accused GM, these things are dangerous, they're rolling bombs. Of course, when the TV show tried
Well, let's call them out. It was NBC. It was the NBC network for a news show. And they kept crashing vehicles into the trucks to try to replicate
to make them
this
blow up.
problem.
Yeah.
And they didn't catch on fire, so they took model rocket engines and hooked them up to the gas tanks so that when they were hit, the engines went off, there was a spark. If there was any leakage, there would be a fire, and they had their great film at 11.
This is just showing you what happens when the do-gooders and the lamestream media gets involved with trying to fabricate a story. That's why you come to Cars in Context, the real story. If you really want to know the real story behind the Pinto gas tank fires, you can go to the Pinto Car Club of America's own website, the PCCA, which is pinto.com, and on there they have a very long, detailed study from academia that proves that the entire thing was actually flawed. The Pinto was more unsafe than any other car of its era.
Right.
In fact, it was about mid-pack. It had fewer fatalities in a Ford Pinto fire than in Datsuns and Chevrolet Novas at the time, even though Pinto sold more cars. So that's a problem I have. And now today we've also been hit with the Crown Victorias. That car, the Panther platform, Jim, it does not have its gas tank.
No.
It actually is above the axle, and yet still police officers have been killed because these semi-tractor trailers doing 90 miles an hour plow into even a full-size Crown Victoria and deform the body to such an extent that it does impact the gas tank.
Again, it's a matter of physics. It's weight and speed.
Yeah, yeah. And even though now they don't make the Crown Victoria anymore, again, if you looked at the design of the vehicle, folks, it's not the design. So the real story, as you're going to get here on Cars in Context, is not the design. Sometimes, even when the government decides on a fix, the fix becomes worse than the problem itself. So we really wanted you to know the real story of what's really going on. Jim, I really thank you for all that insight. That's pretty awesome. And
you're quite welcome.
It's hard to reverse the damage that has been done by urban legend. Pinto will never probably ever re-enter the car market, but unfortunately, at least the truth can be told today.
As you can tell, I still love them.
Still like your little car, yeah. Okay, well, listen, now it's time for one of our favorite segments of the show. This segment is called Pride in My Ride. This is where you, the viewer, send me a picture, a JPEG hopefully, of your car, and you tell me why you have pride in your ride, and we put it on the air. So today's Pride in My Ride comes to us from a viewer, Jim, that watches Cars in Context on our YouTube channel, which is Cars in Context TV. And he saw one of our shows that had my 77 Cobra 2 on Pride in My Ride. So what did he do?
Wait a minute, that had the same gas tank
position
as the Pinto.
It did, and I was hit in the back end of that Mustang at a high rate of speed of 50 miles an hour, knocked into an intersection, and I never had a problem. So, although a little sore neck. But I can tell you, this is Mike Baker's beautiful, wonderful
that's in great shape.
77 Cobra 2. He's from Elgin, Illinois. He's completely restored his little Mustang 2. It's got a 5-liter V8, Jim. That is a 2-barrel. Yet it only had, the rumor was, everyone hates the Mustang 2, didn't have power. But that 5-liter, although it only made 140 horsepower, Jim, it did have 227 foot-pounds of torque.
Right.
Look, there's a beautiful shot of his car there winning a show award at his local Mustang car show. Mike, I really thank you for sending me in that picture and watching us on the YouTube channel Cars in Context TV. If you people have a car that you want on Pride in Your Ride, send it to me, John Clor, jclor at carsincontext.com, and we'll be sure to put it on the air. But Jim, that's not all. Every once in a while we do get some viewer mail.
Okay.
And hopefully we're going to ask Lauren Parrott. Lauren, is it possible that Cars in Context, again, this week, has viewer mail?
Yes, it is possible.
Oh, possible. Not only possible, it's here. Thank you
Here
so
it
much,
is.
Lauren
Okay.
Parrott.
She typed it all up for us,
And you
too.
saved the
That's
show.
Very efficient.
Thank you, Lauren. Very nice job on the typing. Jim, why don't you take the first letter?
Okay. This missive comes to us from Jill R. of Farmington. She watches Cars in Context on AT&T Uverse Channel 99.
Okay.
And she writes, Dear Cars in Context, I have heard that Mini was going to stop selling my vehicle, a Mini club van, because of poor sales. I know I have not seen another one around town, so I believe my salesman when he told me that the club van simply isn't selling well in the U.S.
That's why they're going to drop it, not sell it.
But he also said it was partly to do something he called the chicken tax. What is he talking about?
So it's not because it's not selling well, it's because it has the chicken tax.
This has nothing at all to do whether Notre Dame is going to play the University of Michigan in football anymore.
It's not the chicken tax.
It's something entirely different. But it does involve chickens. Back in the 60s, what was then known as the European Common Market, it had evolved into the European Union, slapped import taxes on chickens shipped from the United States. To retaliate, the U.S. then imposed a 25% import tax on trucks and vans imported from Europe. To make it legal, the U.S. had to impose the tax on all trucks and vans, not just those coming from Europe. And since it was specifically in retaliation for the tariffs that Europe had put on chickens, it became known as the chicken tax.
There you go. See, Jill, that's why you watch Cars in Context for those kinds of great answers. Now I've got one, Jim. This one comes to us from Sal M. of Harper Woods. He watches us on WOW Cable Channel 10. All you WOW subscribers. Dear John, saw a story about Brazilian-made cars. They're being manufactured substandard levels. They're supposedly so bad that while traffic fatalities in the U.S. are down 40%, in Brazil they're up by 72%. Why? How come Brazil's mandate for airbags isn't coming until next year? Why do they make such poor cars? Well, Sal, I can tell you this. There's a lot more than making a safe car than just throwing an airbag in it. The reason why in Brazil cars are not doing well in crash tests is because they're cheap. They don't want to put in a lot of cost in their cars. They want low-priced cars with not all that safety equipment. And when you add all that stuff, your $3,000, $4,000 car becomes a $12,000 car. They just don't want to drive up costs in Brazil. Now, if we do have this global standard, they're going to have to do that. So there's the challenge. The government, when it gets involved in telling you what kind of car, safety is a wonderful thing, but when you price it out of your reach, that means people who are poor people who can't afford cars will never be given the freedom and the mobility of transportation because of a government mandate. And that's the issue. It's a big question. Hey, listen, I think we should do a show about that someday.
Okay.
Okay, folks, if you have a question for me, John Clor, on Cars in Context, send it to me, jclor@carsincontext.com, and we'll be sure to give it some airtime. Jim, thanks again for coming by. And folks, thank you for watching Cars in Context. Until next time, remember, knowledge is power. I'm your host, John Clor. We'll see you then.